Can you hear me? Maybe? Yep. Okay, perfect. So as Alexa said, I'm Tucker Ruich. I've been at Mastercard for about 4 years now. Just to give you a little bit of reference, our user base right now for Domo is just over 4,000 users with 3,100 logging in the last 30 days. So we also have a second instance, which we refer to as staging, and that's going to be right around 400. So the second instance. Throughout my time at Mastercard, whether it was in Excel, Power Query, Power Pivot, or any of these other tools, we've run into the same issues with reporting. You're going to have people go off and do what I call rogue reporting, right? Just do something completely on their own. People have different versions of the report, and that can either be from using their own logic to pull the data, or just simply having the wrong version of Excel, right? I can't tell you how many times we run into people who used to say, oh yeah, you have version 20, I'm on 21. Numbers are completely different, right? And then finally, the largest issue of them all was the demand for reporting continued to exceed the capacity we had to fulfill that. So we had to think about what we could do. So a little bit before we get into there, let's talk about what was established at Mastercard before. So early on, the marketing group kind of had this mindset, and I think some Domo kind of had that early on too, was almost like crowdsourcing and a little bit of a free-for-all, right? And it was people would log in, they could pretty much have unlimited access, which led to uploading their own data, creating as many pages as they wanted to, multiple cards on pages, some would be in flight, some wouldn't. Nobody really knew what was correct, right? So if we go back to those original issues, we still had the issue of people doing their own reporting, differing logic to bring in data, and different versions, right? If we think about cards or what page they were on and all of that. This was in stark contrast to what our team did. We had this idea that we needed to pull the data. We wrote the requirements for the SQL. We'd pull it into, again, Excel at the time via Power Query, Power Pivot, Access, whatever it was. We'd build out all the visuals, and then we'd publish the reports by sending them out via email or putting them on a website. And that's great, right? We kind of controlled everything. We thought we were the source of truth. People would still go off and do their rogue reporting, but you can't always fix that. But again, the strain that it put on us to do every single step only made it worse for this, capacity issue that we had. And so we had to think about what can we change in order to make it easier? How can we work smarter to allow us to fix this capacity issue? Because I have two of my managers here today, and headcount's not going to happen, right? So we had to figure out something else. And we really, before we could do that, needed to reel in Domo. Josh talked about it today, kind of this central hub, right, that L'Oreal has. You have to have a structure there before you expand out. So what we did is we kind of took what we did in Excel and brought that back in to Domo. So now every time a user logged in, they were given a birthright role and participant access. No longer were users able to create cards, bring in their own data. We really took control of that process and said, this is going to be something that we're in control of. Along with that birthright view, we had set pages at the top. So every time and still to this day, any user logs into our instance of Domo, they're going to see the same pages, the same sub pages, and they're going to be able to talk apples to apples. So whether they're in Australia, Brussels, the US, Mexico, they all see that same page structure. And then the third and final thing we did, which is kind of outside of those original issues, was we created a support mailbox. So often I think, whether you're a major Domo or you're new, we kind of get these questions on how can we support our users without allowing them to call Domo up for questions on, hey, how do I build a card, right? And we created a support mailbox internally at Mastercard, just called Domo Support at mastercard.com, and allowed for users to start reaching out to that as their point of contact. Now, 90% of the original emails were just yelling specifically at me at the time, managing the mailbox, complaining about loss of access, and then I'd get more that, I'm a bad person for taking away their access, and then more that I can't even say up here. But point being, that started to drive behavior, right? Because as much as they were pissed off or upset or angry, at the end of the day, they were still coming to me, and which really was the support mailbox to say, hey, how can I do this? How can I get my reports into Domo? So we started to take everything back, establish our control, but again, we still had the capacity issue. So we had to get smarter. We had to say, what can we do to fix this? We needed a shift in mindset. And so often, people, whether it's at this conference or just in everyday conversation, believe that when you are the dashboarding team, that you're responsible for everything. I mean, we saw that our team even did that in Excel, right? And this is just a misconception. At the end of the day, the people requesting the data are generally giving you specifications on how to pull that, in our case, what they want to show, and who they want to show that to. So really, what value are we bringing there? And what we said is we're going to be responsible for three things. Making sure the data is refreshed and that connection piece to the data. The second is that users are going to have access to that information, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what creating these reports is about. And then finally, we're going to support them in this tool. Domo's new. We already have the mailbox set up, but we also have to teach them, empower them to really utilize this tool. And I'll go into some of that later. So at this point, bringing and reeling everything back in, we felt that we now don't have an issue with multiple versions of the report. Domo's starting to become the single source of truth, right? So, the rogue reporting starts to kind of go away. The versions don't matter, but we've got this idea. We think this is going to solve capacity. But we had an issue, and that is, where can we do this? So our idea was, let's create a second instance. In the technology industry, which Mastercard is, it's not a credit card company. We can talk about that later. But in the technology industry, we have this all the time with different databases or different products. We'll have a sandbox or a staging instance. So that way we avoid impacting users in production. We took that same mindset and said, well, why don't we create a Domo instance like that? And so we reached out to our customer success manager, talked to him, wanted to understand what a second instance entailed, how we can do that. And really at the end of the day, for those of you who don't have a second instance or are curious on how we did it, it's completely separate, right? A different URL. It could have been, visa.domo.com, l'oreal.domo.com. And ours was just mastercard-staging.domo.com. And when I say completely separate, that means users can exist in one but not the other. They have to, if you were going to onboard them manually, we have single sign-on, so it's a little bit easier. They have to log into both instances, right? And so what this allowed us to do is differentiate between the two instances on what we felt users should have access to and be able to do. Right, I spoke earlier on the production side of things. We created the participant role and that birthright access, and that's what users were defaulted to. They couldn't upload data. Well, in staging, we wanted them to be able to start to build their own cards. We continue to get these requests that we were unable to meet. And so we gave them a custom role, which is just below editor access, but they're still unable to upload data. And the reason we did this is not to prevent them, because everything's a case-by-case basis, right? But at the end of the day, if somebody is wanting to upload that data, we want to make sure that we're aware of it. And so by default, they could just create cards based on what data was there. And then one of the greatest things about having a second instance, which I'll touch on here later, is the ability to control the refresh to that instance. So what I mean by that is we have a data set dealing with ticketing data, whether it's internal or external, and that gets refreshed hourly. Well, if I want users to have access to that information in our staging environment, I don't want them to have the hourly updates, because if I do that, it essentially becomes another production environment. So if I control that refresh and make it once or twice a month, users have everything they need to go out and build those cards from a data perspective. They have all the schema, they have the column names, and they have enough data to really build out what they want, build that structure. And then finally, and the most important thing about all of this is establishing the mindset that that's a staging instance. Reports will not be official until they come back to production. So this took a little bit of effort, right? And we're still working on it, and things like certified cards and certified content are helping us do that. But we really have to engrave in the minds of our users that anytime you're wanting to come to our staging instance is with the intent that that report comes back to production and that it goes to the executives or the management or whoever you want that to go to. It's not just, let me go create an ad hoc report with some data, go publish that out there, and call it a day. So as long as they're going into our staging instance with the intent to come back, they're really starting to align with this process we created. So we have everything built out, and we're like, all right, perfect. We've got this set up. We're gonna get rid of this capacity issue, and if you build it, they will come, right? Field of dreams. That's not the case. Didn't happen at all, right? And there's this mindset our users had was, well, you guys already do this for us. Why would we want to take our own capacity and do it instead, right? Which makes sense. So we took on this internal sales role for a couple months, reaching out to different executives, different managers, say, hey, we have this available, you can do this. Got some traction, but everything kind of failed. So it no longer became an option, but it kind of became one direction. And anytime we had an incoming request, instead of saying, hey, you as a requester can go off and build your own content, what we started to say is, you can either go build your content now in our staging instance, or we'll put you to the back of to our reporting queue. And I have no idea when we'll get to your report. Good luck in 2021, right? So once executives or once management kind of has a deadline, and wants these reports to get out there, it's amazing how many people started logging into Stage and creating their own reports. So we've got this instance set up, right? And now we have people who actually want to use it, or are being forced to use it, or as we heard today, right, voluntold to use it. And we needed to create a workflow to get this set up. So what you'll see here is a nice little picture of what the general workflow that our users will follow for a first-time request. Kind of starts in the bottom left here with the little Simpsons characters, or somebody yesterday said that's a cute couple. I didn't think they were dating, but maybe they are. And right, we're responsible for three things in this process. Connecting to the data and making sure it's refreshed. So that's that first yellow arrow, which will be brought into the production instance of Domo. It's always important to bring the data into production first. And again, I'll touch base on why that's so important. But we always want to make sure that we have some data in our production instance. From there, we'll use the Domo dataset copy connector tool to actually pull the data into our staging instance, which is that nice little pink ODBC icon we have there. Again, I'll be showing you how we actually do that here shortly. From there, we make the data available to the users, right? So 3 things we're responsible for: connecting and refreshing the data. That's one. The second aspect is making the data available to the users, which is kind of that data set copy icon there. And then the third thing is going to be support of the tool. And in the bottom right is where we'll kind of take the process to go and meet with these teams, teach them how to build, answer their questions, have meetings with them. And then this final step is moving the data from, moving the cards, from instances. There's a little toll gate there. And again, I'll touch on why we look for these best practices, but it's really important that just because you're having other people create, or just because we're having other people create cards and build out their own reports in this staging instance, we're still taking ownership of production, right? At the end of the day, they're wanting to come back to production and make it a certified report. We need to understand what's going into that environment and make sure that it's built with the best practices in mind that we've set. So the Domo dataset copy advanced connector, said that wrong, but it's on the screen. So I'll show you how we actually move data in between instances. So if you can please switch to the laptop. So what I have here is the tool, and it's actually available through one of the cloud plugins. You're going to have to create an account with a token, which I've already done. And then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to say, what instance do we want to actually pull that data from? So our main instance is Mastercard. Then you're going to select a dataset ID on the data that you want to pull in. We have two options here for whether you only want to pull the data if it's been updated since the last time you've run that. I generally just put yes. And then if you want to use the origin schema, which I also put yes. If I hit next, this is kind of what I was touching on earlier, right? And so the main thing is we can control the schedule for how this is being refreshed. Again, everything's going to be a case-by-case basis. Some data sets will be refreshed weekly. Some data sets will just be refreshed once a month. And some will only be refreshed once. But the ability to be able to control this is one of the main kind of bonuses that the second instance provided us with, instead of kind of cordoning off a little section in production. So for this, I'll go into what I generally do, and I'll hit the advanced scheduling. And we'll just do the second Thursday of each month, or each week. Yeah, second Thursday of each month. From there, I'll start this immediately. I'll hit next. And normally, I will use the same data set that's in production, but for this, since I forget which one I chose, I'm going to hit save as test. And we can see that, I think it's just 6 rows. If I hit run now, it'll import, perfect, worked perfectly right, just as I planned. And it'll go into the other environment. I think this has to do with me using SSO on a different computer. But point being is just like that, it's made available, right? And so now you have that same data set in both production and in stage. So if we can switch back to the PowerPoint, please. All right, so again, if we think about what we've been able to do so far, the 3 things, right? Connecting and refreshing the data, step 1. Brought it into production. Making it available to the users, step 2. We've done that, not successfully here, but it works all the other times that I do it, right? And then step 3 is support of the tool. And so we'll meet with each user. That's not just me, it's a team of us. And really there are a couple things to focus on here. The first is going to be each meeting is unique, right? I have users that have done plenty of work in Tableau. They'll go in and our meeting will be 15 minutes focused on beast mode or custom calculations, and they can probably do more than I can. But then I also have meetings with groups that can barely make pivot tables in Excel, and it's frustrating, right? Spending an hour just saying, okay, let's drag this field from the data section into the x-axis, explaining what we put on an x versus y. Not always fun, right? But each meeting is unique in that way, and it's really important for me to kind of build that relationship with these requesters. And one of the reasons why is as you kind of start to build that and you build that trust, going back to the original thing of driving behavior and understanding who owns the tool, sure, it's annoying to get questions here and there, but at the end of the day, they know that I have their best interest in mind, and the reason why I'm making them do certain things is because we want to keep it as a clean environment. That's part of empowering the user. One of the issues that we had in the past, whether it was in Excel or just in general, was that when we were responsible for everything, if there was an issue, it was our issue. if you start getting your users, right, to build their own cards and their names are on those cards or their names are on their pages, there's stake in the game. If there's an issue, it could still be your fault, but they're going to start looking into it faster because their face and their name's out there. And so with all of that, we go into catering to their schedule. This doesn't mean kind of, be on call, if you will. But what that does mean is, again, just like I said, each meeting is unique, kind of each interaction is unique. I'll have groups that I meet with weekly, groups that will go into our staging instance, and then 2 months later say, hey, I'm ready to move these over to production. Again, it just depends, but really being able to understand what's needed on your side and plan ahead for that from a capacity standpoint will really help. And then finally, best practices. So I touched on this earlier, and just like the requesters are the ones that know the data they want to pull, the visuals that they want to show, at the end of the day, I can't tell them what to show and what not to show. But what I can do is say, make sure every card has a title. Make sure you're using the proper type of filter, whether that's an interaction or a hard filter or a quick filter. Make sure you're labeling or choosing correct colors. I can't tell you how many times people are trying to show trends and they choose red as something good, right? Generally, that's not good. So, really, because we still own we still own Domo. We still need to govern it. We'll put these guardrails in place to say, hey, if you follow these, you have some leeway to build what you want and build it in the way that you want it. But just make sure that when we're putting out content, if we're going to approve it and we're going to bring it back to that production instance of Domo, then we want to make sure that it's built properly. So this final step is actually bringing the cards back from our staging instance to production. So since we saw how well the dataset copy worked, I'm going to avoid trying to do the demo here. I'm going to talk to it, try to use your imagination. If not, reach out to me and I'm happy to give you a full demo. But really what this is a Excel plugin tool that you can reach out to your customer success manager about. And it allows you to do a couple things, but what I want to focus on is this card copy. So what you'll do, and it's hard to see, is essentially just call out the instances that you're moving cards from or to, the page that you want to move these cards to, and then the data set that you're going to want to move it to. And so all of those can be found in the URLs in Domo. It's a little bit of copy and pasting, but not horrible. And then there's a green execute button up there. We'd click that. Again, just like earlier, it would work perfectly. And you would actually see the cards on your page in production. So if we think about kind of, what's needed from our team, right, in those 3 steps, we're still connecting to and refreshing the data, making sure that it's available, and supporting the tool. This kind of falls into that support. It is a little bit of a manual process, but at the same time, it kind of gives us that final toll gate in order to make sure we're controlling what goes into the environment and what's accessible by all of our users. Because our production instance of Domo is the single source of truth, right? If it's available and if it's out there, our team's stamp of approval is on that. And so this allows us to kind of have that one final check. So if we kind of think about everything that happened through this process, we came into Domo as the second group and really wanted to shift how we were managing it. We reeled in controls. From there, we wanted to empower the users, partly because we didn't have the capacity to build everything out on their own. But it sounds better if we say empower users, right? So you can use that if you want. But we built this second instance. We said this provides the perfect balance of governance, but at the same time, freedom for our users to really go out, understand Domo, utilize the ease of building, and get to the information and reports that they want to show. From there, we've been able to expand. As I said, our stage user base is around 400 users, so about 10% of our production instance. And we're continuing to grow because that is the only option. And as more and more groups are seeing how easy it is to use Domo, they want to go in and build because they don't want to wait for us. We've got, 350 outstanding items we have to do, right? And so I wouldn't want to wait either. But allowing them to have that instance to go and build and go and do everything, has helped. So at the end of the day, with this second instance, did Domo fix all of those original reporting issues that we had? Probably not, right? But what they did is they provided us with the tools and with the ability to go in and fix them ourselves. So that's it. Thank you, and I guess questions? Yes.
As far as permissioning,
Uh-huh.
cards or sharing them, when you move it from your stage to production,
Yep.
handle the permissioning.
Okay, so the question was on permissioning and bringing the cards from stage to production. So 90% of what we've built out in our production, 90% is shared to everybody, right? Because we kind of went top down, so we wanted that executive level view. So things like PDPs and permissions, we're not dealing with as much on a daily basis as some of you are. But for right now, when we do have a case like that, we are handling the permissioning. In the staging instance, they're controlling who they want to see that page, and we'll have a good idea of the list from there. And so that's just another requirement that we ask for, which again is a little bit manual, and we're working to fix that. Bringing it over to production will then, limit that page or limit those cards to the individual users or groups.
Pass this down, please.
In your workflow, you mentioned bringing the data to production first and then staging.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I missed it, but I didn't quite see how you fleshed that out. You stressed the importance of that. I didn't quite see that, like where.
Yeah, no. The importance of that is, and I missed some of this. So when we're bringing those cards back from staging to production, what's happening on the back end is it's essentially just saying, take all these cards and instead of using this data set, use the one in production, right? And so if we don't have that data in production first, we become a bottleneck again. And we have to go in, make sure that connection's established. And for some of you, that might not be a big deal depending on what the data size is. But for us, if we're talking transaction data, and let's say we get 2 months of data in there by day. If it takes them that long to build out and stage, and we have to go backfill, now we're talking about 500 million records, which can take us a couple days to backfill. So that's why we place the importance upon getting the data into production first, and a follow-up to that. If we're unable to get that full connection set up, what we will do is we'll get sample data in there. Because again, the most important thing is that they have something to work with that has similar columns and schema. So whether it's an Excel extract, which we try to avoid, we'll get some sort of data in production and then move that over.
Okay, that was going to be my next question is, do you find yourself ever a bottleneck for getting something into production and then to staging? But I guess if you just answered that by taking a snippet or a sample. Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, so you mentioned that the alternative to having a second instance would be to cordon off a section of production. I'm wondering, what are the advantages to having a second instance as opposed to having like the participant role having access to a work in progress staging page and no ability to create new pages?
Yeah, so I think eventually where we're going to end up is there's going to be a mixture to kind of page owners or people being able to edit in our production instance, with the masses still going to stage. And the reason why is, again, one of those being the data refresh and just, I don't trust everybody. That's maybe I have trust issues. I don't know. But and then the other aspect is just role granularity at this point. As users, if I give you editor access, then you can essentially edit any page you want, right? Now there's some things here and there that prevent that, like locking down cards or locking down pages. But then you have to make them the page owner, and this presentation was prior to groups becoming page owners, right? So I think there is a path going forward to allow for that. But one of the nice things about our staging instance is I don't have to manage the pages. They can create 100 because I know that in production, they're only going to have one, and they need to have the mindset that they're going to come back to production. So you as the admin are probably having to manage all of that in production and know which pages they have, how many are out there, and if not, it becomes kind of a burden for however many users you do have kind of in that cordon off area.
And so when you have a card in staging that's copied over to production, if that page does not exist in production, is an equivalent page also generated?
So they do have the copy page. I generally stick to the copy cards. I've had more success with that. So you'll actually point to the page. So I might create a page, or one might already exist. And so in that, it's not like you can see it anyway, but one of them says destination info. So you're actually going to put in the page information you want to move the cards to. So whether you create one before you do this or one exists already, you can call that out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hey, with that process flow, what happens when some data changes on the underlying data set and winds up breaking one of your production cards?
Yeah, so people come and complain to us just like they did when I took away their access. But no, I think when the underlying data changes and messes up something in our production card, that problem would exist if we didn't have the second instance or if it did, right? And so it's a case-by-case basis on how we fix that. But it's just a case-by-case basis. I can't give you a full answer right now. But if you've got a specific question, we can talk about it after this.
If you make a change to the data set in production, like you're adding a new field, does it automatically flow through the connector tool to the staging environment, or do you have to manually refresh in the staging environment to pull the new fields over?
Yeah, so that's a good question because we often will have our underlying data change, whether it's a new field or we need to update schema. And so one of the options that I had and I was showing on the screen was Domo added a new feature that said choose original schema or something like that. And so in theory, that should take what the schema is in that data set and automatically update it. So an example would be sometimes on Workbench we have IDs and it's easier to upload them by number. Well, we need them by text for filters, right? So if I go in, change that job to a text field, if that refresh runs on whatever schedule it will be, it should update then to a text field in that staging instance.
So thanks for sharing. Interesting approach and process to develop your user base. I guess less technical, more behavioral, and maybe I missed it. What's to stop them from, in lieu of waiting to get to the queue or going through the process you outlined, to just going and doing it the way they used to do it, either in Excel or SmartView?
Yeah, so I mean, the simple answer is we can't prevent all of that, right? But What we've been able to do through this approach and through taking that top-down approach is really establish with some of the executives that Domo is the single source of truth. And by doing that, when these reports or these cards are being put out into a PDF and they have that Domo and Mastercard logo on it, going all the way back here. Next one. Right, in the top left corner, you see that Domo Mastercard. It's essentially what that certified data set and certified cards are that Domo is allowing us to do, right? It's our stamp of approval, it's their stamp of approval. So if they come back to whoever their executive is or whoever it might be and say, here are the numbers I'm getting, which we still have, the question is, did you get that from Domo or not? If they say no, then they're wrong. Well, hopefully they're wrong, right? But if they say yes and they just went off and somehow built that on their own, then the conversation with us kind of occurs and what's your need? How have we not been able to suffice that or help you out and go from there? But yeah, I mean, we can't always prevent it, but if you get the right people to establish that Domo is the path they need to take, then people will follow.
Hi, you mentioned, I think, having about 4,000 users.
Mm-hmm.
How big is the team that supports those users and handles the administration?
Yeah, so our team is built up of, I think, we keep switching, but probably around 6. It's under 10. And so we have had people transfer to other teams, and we're starting to try to utilize that again, make it easier on ourselves. But for the primary admin functions, it gets down probably to about 3 of us are really maintaining all of that.
And it's like their sole responsibility, kind of the administration, or they're doing?
I wish. No, we've enabled single sign-on, and we have that birthright role. So a lot of the questions on passwords or getting their account set up, we don't have to worry about, along with, since 90% of those pages are shared to the public, we don't have to maintain the process of, hey, can you add this person to this page or this person to this group? So that's helped us a little bit there and made it a little bit easier for us to maintain.
So I just want to make sure I understand the process flow a little bit better. So you upload your data into your production environment, and then you use the data set copy ID to move it into your staging environment.
Correct.
And then in your staging environment, only the analysts and people on your team can actually go and build the cards, or you are still allowing the other users to build the cards in the staging environment. You need to approve it, and then it uploads into the production environment.
The latter of those two. So by default, when people log into our staging instance, they have that ability to access that. So anybody can go in, and if the data set's been shared with them, they can go and build cards, right? But we are at the end of that process right now controlling what comes back to production.
Do you find any limitations to the data set copy connector in terms of like larger data sets and row count? You mentioned 500 million rows or anything like that.
It always ends up working. So I think that's probably on the larger size of what we've done. But if we are in a time crunch, right, that's when we kind of will bring in that sample data and just cap and upload it, maybe 100 mil max, and then just bring that over. But at this point, no, I've never had anything fail unless you're trying to refresh it daily and the process takes longer than a day. But if you're doing that, you probably run into the same issue with data flows. So.
Got it. Thank you.
Oh, are we? Okay. Okay, let's hear it for Tucker, everyone. Thank you.